The ballroom at the Global Development Forum in Washington, D.C. was full of leaders, donors, and delegates. Red, white, and blue banners hung along the marble walls, and the stage decorated with an American flag and the words "Partnership for Progress" was ready for a moment no one expected, but no one could ignore. Donald Trump stood at the podium, gripping the sides with both hands, his chin lifted and his voice loud and confident. Cameras were broadcasting the event live around the world as he declared, "America has done more for this world than any other country. We've fed nations, built roads, defended freedom," and then added sharply, "and some still dare to bite the hand that feeds them." He looked straight at the African delegates sitting in the reserved section, and the cameras followed. His gaze, "You should be grateful," he said coldly. "We've kept your lights on. We've kept your people alive. Don't come here acting like you don't need us." The room went silent, uncomfortable. Then, from the shadows, Ibrahim Traoré slowly stood up. He wore a simple tan tunic with no tie and didn't walk with aggression. He moved like someone who already understood how big this moment was. The silence grew deeper as he walked past a nervous aide who whispered, "He's not going to let that slide, is he?" Traoré stepped onto the stage without even looking at Trump. He calmly adjusted the microphone and, in a quiet but powerful voice, said, "We're done begging." The room froze. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone gasped. Trump raised his eyebrows but stayed silent. Traoré continued, saying, "When you give with strings attached, that's not generosity, it's control. When you call it charity but demand loyalty, that's not help, it's leverage." Cameras focused on Trump's tense face, but Traoré looked only at the audience. He added, "Yes, America's help mattered, but we paid for it with our silence, our obedience, our sovereignty, and we're done with that deal." No one clapped, at least not yet. The crowd couldn't tell if this was a speech or the start of something bigger, and that's exactly how Traoré wanted it. Trump just stood there, lips slightly curled. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not with such calm confidence. The silence after those words wasn't empty, it was heavy, awkward, and electric. Trump leaned toward his mic, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me get this straight," he said. "We give billions in aid, open trade routes, provide military protection, and now the guy in sandals says we're the problem." A few people at the back gave polite laughs, but not many. Traoré didn't react. He simply stepped closer to the podium, now standing just inches from Trump. In a calm voice, he said, "I wear sandals because I walk among my people. You wear walls. That's the difference." The moderators panicked, one of them quickly trying to interrupt. "Gentlemen, maybe we can go back to the topic of sustainable partnerships." But Traoré lifted his hand not to silence the room, but to hold it. Then he spoke again, this time to everyone watching, leaders, analysts, students around the world. "You don't get to rewrite the deal anymore. For decades, we've signed contracts in your language, built on your rules, enforced by your systems. When we win, we owe you interest. When we lose, we owe you loyalty. That ends now." A quiet murmur spread through the room. One European delegate whispered, "Is this the start of a new non-aligned movement?" Trump stepped back and narrowed his eyes. "You're acting tough now, but without U.S. aid, some of your countries would collapse." Traoré turned slowly and replied, Maybe we would have collapsed, but maybe we would have rebuilt on our own terms, without the strings." The American team looked uneasy. This wasn't a forum anymore, it was a reckoning. And the world was watching, trying to calm things down. The moderator adjusted his earpiece and said, "Let's return to the economic topic. President Traoré, you mentioned sovereignty. What alternatives do you offer instead of international aid?" Traoré took a deep breath. "Let's talk about debt," he said. "Not just the kind you find in World Bank contracts, but the kind of debt that's been carved deep into the soil of my continent." The room went quiet again. Trump crossed his arms and smirked, as if expecting another long history lesson. But Traoré didn't flinch. "Where I come from," he said, "we inherited more than just borders. We inherited broken systems, damaged by foreign powers. Colonization didn't just take gold. It took farmers and made them laborers. It stole knowledge and replaced it with dependency." Trump raised an eyebrow and muttered, "Is this a history class now?" Without even turning, Traoré calmly replied. No, we're talking about receipts. He pulled a small, worn paper from his coat pocket and unfolded it. It wasn't flashy, just an old document. Burkina Faso, 1962. A treaty signed under pressure, promising resources to France in exchange for technical help. This, Traoré said, holding it up, is the model the world followed. You renamed it aid. You called it investment, but it was always designed to keep us dependent. The room grew still as the screens above zoomed in on the faded ink. A date, a signature, a promise never questioned. Until now. And then he added, we were told to say thank you. Trump leaned forward again. We didn't sign that treaty. That's not America's fault. Traoré nodded slightly. No. But America perfected the system. You didn't build the chains, you just made them global. The gasps were real and unfiltered. Even Trump's own team looked uneasy. We're not ungrateful, Traoré said, finishing. We're awake. The silence that followed wasn't from shock, it was from understanding. Across the world, on live streams and news feeds, young people from Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia watched and nodded. Trump's voice rose, sharper now. So America's the bad guy? Is that it? He snapped. We've rebuilt cities after disasters, fought terrorism side by side with your soldiers, led global development, and this is the thanks we get. He gestured toward Traoré. But Traoré just tilted his head slightly, like a teacher responding to his students' outburst. We never asked for pity, he said. We asked for respect. The words hung in the air. A delegate from Kenya tapped the table softly in support. A South American official gave a subtle nod, right in front of everyone. The balance of global power, the one everyone thought was fixed, had started to shift, and Trump still wasn't done. Trump pointed a finger at Traoré and said, you're young. You don't understand how the world works. It's complicated. It takes more than ideals and slogans. Traoré stayed calm and replied, I agree. It takes courage, the kind of courage to walk away from comfort, from the illusion of safety that comes with dependency. He turned to the crowd and continued, we were told that progress means imitation, that modernity means copying the West. But what if it doesn't? What if it looks like muddy boots? Like native seeds, like voices that don't sound American? The moderator tried to jump in, saying, gentlemen, let's stick to the agenda. But Traoré responded sharply, the agenda has always been yours. Maybe it's time we write our own. Cameras quickly turned to him, and live streams lit up around the world. Viewers took screenshots of Traoré, not angry, not smug, just clear and powerful, like light cutting through fog. Trump crossed his arms and said, you'll see. Let's see how far you get without us. For the first time, Traoré looked him straight in the eyes. That's the thing, Mr. Trump. We're already further than you think. And Trump had nothing to say back. Traoré turned to the audience and let his words sink in. Then he added, there comes a time when silence becomes betrayal, not to others, but to ourselves. A few African delegates nodded quietly in agreement. Trump scoffed, still crossing his arms. Spare me the speeches, he said. I've sat across from dictators and dreamers. I know what this is. You're building a brand, not a nation. The comment caused a mix of awkward laughter and surprised looks. Even people watching on YouTube and cable news started reacting in real time. Did Trump really say that? He's losing it. Traoré stayed silent for a moment, then leaned forward and placed his hands on the podium. Mr. Trump, he said steadily, you've had the mic long enough. The world has heard your story loud, clear, and repetitive. The room went still. The line wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Then he continued, now, a new generation is speaking, not to ask permission, not to copy, but to redefine. A Palestinian delegate leaned over and whispered, he's not just talking about Africa anymore. Traoré added, you once said that America makes deals, that the art of the deal is about leverage. But some of us, we're not looking for deals anymore, we're looking for dignity. Trump narrowed his eyes and said, without deals, you'll get crushed. Traoré's reply was soft but powerful. Maybe, or maybe we'll grow. Maybe it's the absence of your shadow that finally lets our roots breathe. That line hit hard online. Clips were already going viral. African youth pages, political satire accounts, and even progressive voices in the US were all sharing one powerful line: we're not looking for deals, we're looking for dignity. The moderator, realizing the moment had become historic, quietly stepped back. He knew this wasn't just a panel anymore. It was a shift. The silence in the room wasn't tense now. It was thoughtful. Even some of Trump's usual supporters had stopped defending and started listening. Traoré stepped away from the podium and slowly walked across the stage. When I was 9, he began our school. That its first set of textbooks. They were donations, all written in French, all printed in 1984. I remember flipping through them and seeing a map where my country didn't exist, just a shaded area called French West Africa. He paused. Even our names were missing. The room grew still. We never chose silence, he said, raising his eyes. It was chosen for us, forced, then sold to us as kindness. Trump shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. You should be thanking us. Those books came from countries that care. No, Traoré corrected. They came from countries that needed us to stay behind so they could stay ahead. A wave of movement swept through the room. This wasn't political theater anymore, it was personal. Mr. Trump, Traoré continued, you talk about strength, but I've seen real strength. A mother stretching 1 cup of rice for 6 children. A teacher without chalk writing lessons in dust on a wall. That kind of strength can't be sanctioned. It can't be threatened. Trump leaned forward and said, you think tough talk makes you a leader? Traoré turned toward him. No, but truth does. Then, something unexpected happened. A young Ghanaian student sitting in the international section stood and began clapping alone at first. Then a few more joined. Then more. The applause grew louder, more confident, like a rising wave. Trump looked around. For the first time, the stage didn't belong to him. The spotlight had shifted, and Traoré didn't even seem to care about owning it. As the applause settled, the moderator leaned toward his mic but said nothing. His eyes scanned the room, aware that something bigger had changed, not just the tone, the power. Trump, now unsettled, tried to take control again. Let's be honest, Trump said, his voice louder now. Every country in this room still calls Washington when there's trouble. You want to act tough? Fine. But when floods hit, when coups happen, when you need money, you call us. The room tensed. For a moment, Traoré didn't respond. Then he calmly walked back to the podium, hands by his sides, no notes, no script. He looked at Trump briefly, then stared straight into the camera as if speaking directly to the millions watching at home. We have called, he said, for decades, and every time, we paid for that help with our sovereignty, with our silence, and with approval of wars we never started. He stepped closer. We don't want a seat at your table anymore. Gasps echoed around the room. Eyes widened. But Traoré stood steady. We're building our own table, one that doesn't shake every time someone speaks without your accent. A table where value isn't based on GDP, but on how many people can sleep with dignity. Delegates shifted in their seats. Murmurs started rising from places often overlooked: Malaysia, Bolivia, Somalia. Voices that had been ignored were now sitting taller. Trump rolled his eyes. This is a fantasy, idealism. The real world doesn't work like that. Traoré nodded. You're right. The real world doesn't work like that. But the new one will. That was the moment. Applause erupted, not polite clapping, but real thunder. On TikTok, Twitter, and news streams, hashtags began trending. Hashtag new table, hashtag Traoré or vs Trump, hashtag we are done begging. And inside the hall, as the energy surged, Traoré didn't smile or soak in the spotlight. He simply stepped back and let the weight of his words fill the space, doing what decades of quiet diplomacy never could. He had just invited the world to rethink the rules. As the room buzzed, Trump leaned forward, his arms braced on the table. He wasn't used to being outshined, especially not by someone half his age from a country many Americans couldn't even find on a map. You know what bothers me, Trump said, just loud enough for the mic to catch. It's not your ambition, it's your arrogance. Traoré turned toward him slowly. And you mistake our dignity for arrogance. Trump pushed back. You keep talking about respect, but respect is earned. We built the roads, the aid programs, the international courts. And we buried the bodies. Traoré cut in, sharp and clear. The air snapped. You could feel it. Every diplomat stiffened. Traoré stepped forward once more, locking eyes with Trump. Yes, you built systems, but you designed them to serve yourselves first, to reward those who could afford to buy influence. And when nations tried to stand on their own, Traoré said, you labeled them unstable. He looked around the room. Respect isn't a favor, it's a right. It's not something you hand out in exchange for obedience. The American delegation shifted uncomfortably. Trump's team had expected a debate. They got a reckoning. You say you built the world order, Traoré continued. Then look around. It's falling apart. Not because of us, but because people have finally realized the foundation was hollow all along. Outside the conference hall, crowds were gathering. From Accra to Atlanta, people were watching, tweeting, debating. This wasn't just a speech, it was a televised shift in global tone. Trump slammed his palm on the table. You'll regret pushing us away. Traoré remained calm. We've already survived without you. Regret is for those who believe power lasts forever. Trump leaned back, his face tense, his jaw clenched. The silence between the two men stretched, both locked in an unblinking stare, while the room held its breath like the world was voting with its eyes. Traoré spoke again, his voice steady. You speak as if history belongs to you, like it started when you arrived and ends when you leave. Trump gave a bitter laugh. You wouldn't even have that microphone if it weren't for us. Traoré tilted his head slightly and said, maybe, but the mic is in my hand now. A few diplomats chuckled, not to mock, but because they knew something was shifting. Something old was unraveling. We're not trying to erase history, Traoré said. We're just asking to stop being erased from it. He turned to the crowd. This isn't about America losing. It's about others finally rising. Not to replace, but to exist beside you. Trump scoffed. Empires don't share power. No, Traoré replied. They fall. And what rises after, that's what truly matters. His words landed like a quiet storm, almost whispered, yet thunderous in their impact. Media screens across the world lit up with headlines. Traoré confronts American legacy. African leader sparks global debate on justice and power. UN speech flips the script. In Burkina Faso, people in watch parties cheered. In New York, commentators scrambled. In Washington, aides whispered in hallways. But inside that room, what mattered most was the silence after Traoré spoke. Trump leaned in one last time. This isn't over. Traoré nodded. No, Mr. Trump, it's just beginning. And for the first time that evening, Trump said nothing. The entire hall stood still as Traoré quietly stepped away from the podium. No drama. No fist in the air, just calm, steady footsteps. But the silence he left behind echoed louder than anything Trump had said all night. Finally, the moderator broke the moment. Thank you, President Traoré. Thank you, President Trump. This concludes our session. But no one moved. Outside, the world wasn't in chaos, it was alive with conversation. News channels broke from regular programming. TikTok was overflowing with clips. Young people from Nairobi to New York were sharing and captioning his words. We're done begging. What rises after matters more. In Washington, political analysts rushed to react. It was a slap in the face, one said. A wake-up call, said another. Meanwhile, backstage, Trump was pacing. His aides avoided his gaze. He grabbed a bottle of water and turned to his press secretary. Set up an interview. I need to explain what just happened. But no amount of media spin could undo the moment. Traoré hadn't embarrassed Trump, he had changed the entire atmosphere. In another part of the building, Traoré sat quietly. An aide handed him a phone buzzing with messages. Heads of state, activists, community leaders, they were all reaching out. One message stood out. It was from an African student in London. For the first time, I felt represented, not as a charity case, but as an equal. Thank you. Traoré smiled softly, then stood. A journalist met him at the door and asked, President Traoré, how do you think history will remember this debate? He paused, then answered, history doesn't remember words. It remembers turning points. He glanced back at the hall, and this was one. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds over Manhattan, As Traoré stepped onto the pavement, surrounded by cameras and voices, he didn't wave or pose. He just walked forward. This wasn't just a debate, it was a clash between eras. One man yelled from the podium of the past, holding on to power. The other spoke quietly from the future, rooted in dignity. Trump expected silence. Traoré gave him truth, honest, measured, and impossible to ignore. This wasn't about Burkina Faso versus America. It was about whether the world still bows to the loudest voice or begins to listen to the most honest one. And in that room, for the first time in a long time, the loudest man didn't lead the conversation. Traoré didn't just respond. He changed the entire question, and the world heard him.